Hi everyone, my name is Tanushree and I'm a graduate student in the Mind and Development Lab run by Adina Schachner at the University of California in San Diego. And today I'm going to walk you through a case study in auditory development, what I think is kind of an amazing example of cross-modal auditory perception. We learn a lot about events in the world simply from sounds we hear. We're able to link perceptual input to a rich cross-modal representation of what actually had to happen in the world to cause the sounds we hear. And we're actually so good at this that we can use even the most subtle differences in everyday sounds to guide our decisions and actions. So one surprising example of this is that just from hearing the sound of water being poured, adults can actually judge what temperature the water is. And that's a pretty incredible and pretty nuanced perceptual skill. I want to take a minute to just show you what that actually sounds like. And as we listen to those sounds, you can follow along with the corresponding spectrograms here. Okay, so here is hot water being poured into a glass cup. And this is what the exact same thing sounds like, but now with cold water. One more time, this is hot. And here's cold. Okay, first of all, don't worry if you can't hear the difference right now. This task is more challenging through a speaker than with headphones on. And second, these stimuli were taken from a previously published study out of Charles Spence's lab at Oxford. The acoustic clips are professional recordings of the same amount of water being poured at the same rate from the same height into the same cup. And in those experiments, adults repeatedly succeeded at identifying the sounds as hot or cold water with close to 80% accuracy. So in my lab, we're interested in how we obtained such abilities and how they developed over time. Like adults, can young children extract this level of nuanced meaning from auditory stimuli? Can they also judge temperature from sound? And if so, what does the developmental trajectory of that skill look like? And before I get to the experiments, I wanted to spend a quick minute discussing the implications of this line of work, because while pouring water might not seem like a particularly important sound to most people, this case study is nevertheless useful in providing a foundation for understanding development of auditory perception and also for explaining individual differences in how people make cross-modal inferences more broadly. Auditory perception essentially involves extracting meaning from sound. How do we do this? How might children's perception of sound differ from adults? How might different people hear sounds differently? And critically, if we differ in our basic abilities to link sounds to meaning, then this would be an important source of potential difference in auditory perception and in how it develops over time. And so this is why I and the rest of my lab, who usually study social and music cognition and development, we're fascinated by this somewhat quirky but relevant example of how we hear temperature in sound. Okay, so returning to the question, are auditory perceptual skills like these experience dependent? One school of thought, featuring scholars like William Gaver, who take an ecological approach to auditory perception, they might argue that we develop such skills based on our accumulating experience over time with such everyday sounds. So by this account, the more we hear the sounds of hot or cold water pouring in real life, the better we would be at identifying them. Contrastingly, there is a parallel literature in developmental psychology, which shows that certain foundational aspects of cross-modal perception develop in infancy. So researchers like Liz Spelke have demonstrated that, for example, by 1 month of age, infants realize that sounds and impacts go together. So infants expect to hear a sound when they see an impact between two objects or between an object and a surface, such as a bouncing ball. Infants also appear to systematically map certain kinds of speech sounds to visual shapes with specific properties in the same manner as adults and toddlers, for example, the Booba Kiki effect. So there's a reasonable amount of developmental data supporting nativist accounts of cross-modal event perception. more broadly. And the idea that extensive auditory experience isn't always needed to link sounds to the events that caused them. Now, by this alternate account, presumably, auditory experience should not play a role in our ability to identify water temperature from sound. So here we aim to explore whether this ability to hear water temperature depends on experience or not. And to that end, we first confirm that adults can, in fact, hear water temperature, and we assess whether individual differences in such abilities may be explained by differing everyday experience with such sounds. Next, we ask if young children can also judge temperature from sound. And finally, we test whether there's any change in this ability over development, and we do this cross-sectionally in children of different ages. Our first study was a simple auditory discrimination task using high-quality headphones. We tested 104 UC San Diego undergrads in a pre-registered study. After providing some brief instructions, but before the task itself, we gathered confidence ratings on whether participants thought they would be successful at this task or not. Then in the main test, subjects listened to pairs of sounds and chose which one sounded like hot and cold water. And the setup looked like this. They were allowed to listen to the clips as many times as they liked before making their choice. And participants didn't receive any feedback on their accuracy throughout the task. We used multiple unique sound clips to test generalization across stimuli. There were 4 pairs of sound, each differing only in the material of cup. We had a glass, plastic, paper, and porcelain cup stimuli from those. And all the recordings were taken from that previously published study. Subjects each performed the discrimination task for the 4 sound pairs multiple times for a total of 32 trials. And of course, these were in randomized and counterbalanced order. They then filled out a survey indicating their everyday experience with hot and cold liquids being poured. And we asked them things like how frequently they heard such sounds, whether they self-identified as people who never really drink hot or cold beverages. And then we also asked them some open-ended questions about any other relevant experience they could think of that they may have had. Here are the results of the tasks. Scores are out of 32, chance performance. So if people were just guessing, that would be at 16. And as you can see, everybody scored well above chance. On average, participants were accurate on 93% of trials. A third of the people got all trials correct, and approximately 75% of participants scored 90% or over. There were a few outliers on the low end, but the minimum score was 18. And so as you can see from this heavily skewed distribution, people were incredibly good at this task. And this was actually despite a third of them thinking that they would probably not succeed at it. So their accuracy came as a surprise to them as well. Now let's look at whether performance on the task differs based on how much experience you've had with these types of sounds. Based on the results of the experience questionnaire that I described earlier, we separated certain participants into a low experience group if they self-identified as never or very rarely drinking hot or cold beverages. Again, scores are out of 32 and chance performance would be at 16. So for our normal experience group, this is what performance looked like. And for the low experience group, performance was indeed slightly lower. Now that could suggest a possible role of experience. It's interesting to note though that many people in this low experience group still can do this task very well. So this could mean that there's perhaps no such thing as an adult with truly low experience. Maybe even those who don't drink hot beverages still hear the sound of hot liquids being poured by others, for example. Alternatively, it could be that experience just plays a smaller role than we expected, or simply that our power to detect such effects was low because of ceiling effects. So this motivated us to do a developmental study to get at this question from a different angle. In our next study, this time with children, we aim to get at the notion of auditory experience now from a slightly different perspective. So instead of directly asking people how often they hear these types of sounds, this time we used age as a proxy for experience and asked whether young children can hear water temperature as well. Taking a cross-sectional approach in kids across various ages, we tried to assess whether there's a change in this ability over the developmental time period. This study was a simplified auditory discrimination task. Again, 113 children aged 3 to 12 years old were recruited. They all understood the concepts of hot and cold, and they succeeded at identifying other common sounds like animal sounds. We then made them listen to those same 2 professionally recorded sounds of water being poured that you all listened to at the start. And we asked them which one sounded like hot water and which like cold water. And this is what that interface looked like. It was all done on an iPad, which an experimenter controlled. Children listened to the sounds on high quality Bluetooth headphones. And so experimenters and parents were always blind to condition. Interestingly, we did find evidence of developmental change across various ages. This graph depicts children's accuracy. Each dot is one child's response, which was either correct at the top or incorrect on the bottom. And the blue line shows the results of a logistic regression, predicting the probability of a correct response as a function of age. And as you can see, there's a significant upward trend signaling better performance in older children. Now on this slide, I've plotted performance at each age. The overall height of the bars shows the number of children in each age group. Blue represents correct responses again. Notably, children under 6 years old performed at chance. So 4 and 5-year-olds probably can't do this task, even with a large sample recruited at those ages. And remember, this isn't due to lack of understanding, because pretest trials showed that they understood the task and the concepts of hot and cold. In contrast, 85% of the older children did answer correctly. So it seems that the ability to hear water temperature may not appear until mid-childhood, that it varies with age, and that it may require extensive auditory experience. So this now raises questions about what exactly is happening in those critical years of developmental change between the ages of 4 and 7. And we're currently addressing this in a bigger, better pre-registered version of this KID study. So overall, it seems likely that our ability to extract nuanced meaning from sound does depend on extensive acoustic experience. We think this because our studies demonstrated that adults with less relevant experience were slightly worse at the task, but more importantly, because preschool-age children couldn't do the task, while older kids could accurately make such cross-modal judgments. Based on this data, we believe an experience-based explanation is the most parsimonious account. However, there is a possibility that the developmental change we observe may alternatively be a result of biological maturation. For example, as the auditory system matures, it could potentially change sensitivity to the relevant aspects of the acoustic stimuli. This might make it easier for older children to hear the acoustic frequencies containing the relevant information for distinguishing such sounds, for example. A training study, which we plan in future work, may be able to tease apart these two accounts. If differences are due to experience and not maturation, then an intervention to provide preschool-age children with experience of relevant pouring events should be able to increase their accuracy at those young ages where they previously failed. And so in this way, the current data provide a foundation for answering these broad questions about the role of innate factors and experience in the development of auditory perception. Thank you all very much for listening. I'm excited to talk more about this project and hear your comments during the Q&A session.